Welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast with Stuart Fensterheim, LCSW, your source for the latest tips and practical down-to-earth advice on creating emotionally connected, thriving relationships. Now, here's Stuart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. Today is February 21, and what's sort of exciting for me is it is the birthday of my daughter, who's turning 19. My mother also has a birthday today, so I get to sing happy birthday twice, and we get to have a competition between who do I call first and how do I be with both of them today. And guess what? Both of them are not available today, so I don't have to decide, which is pretty cool. Anyway, when we talk about attachments, what's more struggling than wanting to be close to both people who are so important in your life and knowing that the two of them have a birthday that's sort of special that they get to celebrate on the same day, and I need to try to figure out how I'm going to split myself between my mother, who is just turned 85, and my daughter, who's turned 19. So I get to try to figure that one out, but it's okay, because typically what we do is we all celebrate together, but my mother today is in Sedona at the Sedona Film Festival, which is a really cool event in Sedona, Arizona, if some of you don't know it. And my daughter, who's an ASU student, who also is busy working. So I'm going to have to find other days and other times to celebrate their birthdays. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about kids and parenting, but in a much different way. We're going to talk about how to stay close and connected and how to maintain a really happy, close relationship when you have a newborn. And it is a difficult thing, and most people would not necessarily say the first part of their life with their child is very happy. It's more of a struggle. But we're bringing on Catherine O'Brien and her husband, Rick Heyer, to talk about how the two of them have worked this out. Catherine is a therapist out of Sacramento who I've known for a while, who's going to be sharing with us lots of insights and specific ways that she and her husband have found to do that. And she has shared this with countless couples in her practice who have been able to be happy with baby. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to remind everyone that my show notes will be on my website, and you will be able to get all the essential information, resources, links. There's also an announcement on my couples weekend retreat, that 2 days, 7 conversations that I'm going to be doing on March 5th and 6th, that if you want to sign up for that, it's there as well. And Catherine is also going to be giving to us a free video to help all of us with our parenting. So what can I tell you about Catherine? Catherine O'Brien is a relationship therapist who specializes in helping families really prepare for the transition from pregnancy to parenthood. And what she does in order to accomplish that is helps parents manage that feeling of being so overwhelmed and creating a real deepening connection between the two of you as a couple. She's the founder of a website, and I love the website that she's come up with in the name. It's happywithbaby.com. And what she provides is some counseling services, but what she also does is provide some coaching for, and just not only the new parents, but when couples first find out that they're expecting a baby and all the feelings and emotions that come with that. So she helps both the new parents and also the expecting parents. And one of the things that I love that she does is she does this course on managing expectations, because I think it's the expectations of parenting that gets in the way sometimes. If some of you who've been listening on my show for a while remembers Ellie Taylor, and Ellie out of Australia talked a lot about this, so I'm going to be really interested to see the difference between Ellie's approach and what Catherine provides. Now, what can I tell you about her husband? Rick is a partner. He's an attorney, and together they really have found a way to make this work for them. And they have 2 kids. They have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And they do this parenting together. And they also do this workshop together that I was talking about earlier. So what they have found is that if they work together, that feeling of being overwhelmed and exhaustion and just your doubts of yourself and how competent you are, it goes away because you're not doing it alone. So I really am excited, Catherine, to have you on the show. So welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast.
Thank you, Stuart. We're really excited to be here.
Oh, actually, I said take that back because I don't want to slight your husband. And I apologize from the very beginning here. Us guys need a presence in this, don't we, Rick?
Hi, Stuart.
So welcome, Rick Heyer, to the Couples Expert as well as Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess one of the questions I'd like to start with is really for you, Catherine. And actually, before I even begin, I want to just sort of share that this is sort of, I'm a newbie at this because this is really the first time I have ever done a podcast with 2 people at the same time. So it's pretty interesting. It's an exciting thing to have both of you here because it's not typical. And I want to really have both of you participate equally today in talking about what, Catherine, you're doing with your practice and also the program that the 2 of you are involved with. So let me start with you, Catherine, and just sort of ask, what prompted you to even decide to become a therapist?
Wow, that's a good question. I've known I wanted to be a therapist or somewhere in this field since I was little, like elementary school. And so I graduated high school. I knew I was going to major in psychology, and I did. And then I went and got my master's in psychology. But I think beyond that, I didn't really know what I wanted my focus to be. I liked working with adolescents. I liked working with young adults. But then I found my true passion after we had our first child.
So you knew you wanted to be a therapist from the time you were in an elementary school? Did I hear that right?
Yes.
So are you one of these little kids that would go around and try to help everybody in class? When someone got in trouble, you'd go up and say, "Oh, it's going to be okay." Were you counseling little kids then?
Right. I think on some level, I always did like helping. Like if somebody needed notes taken, I would be like, yeah, I'll copy my notes for you. Just things like that. If they had a program at school, what do you call that? I can't even think of the name now, but like a co-peer relation stuff. I always wanted to do that. I like going to the younger grades and helping out. That was just always, that's always been who I was.
That's great. So it really was a calling for you.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And Rick, you're an attorney, as I mentioned in the introduction. How about for you? What led you to decide to go into law?
Well, I was in the service in my 20s, and when I got out, I wasn't ready to be an adult yet. So I figured the best way to delay that was to keep going to school, and law school seemed like the logical choice. So here I am.
So are you implying that most lawyers are immature, and that's why you decided you'd stay out of the real world and be a lawyer, right?
I can't speak for most lawyers. I can only speak for myself, but that was basically the thought process for me.
That sort of fits, I think, for most of us that have been in school for so long and then decide, hey, maybe it's time to really start doing something with our life, huh?
Yeah.
So for you, Catherine, you're saying that you really got this passion when you had your first child.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about that and what it was that sort of led you to decide to specialize in the sort of prenatal early childhood development.
Well, so I, as a new mom, had no clue as to anything about having a baby. I didn't have much experience with babies. And so I have to say I was honestly petrified. I remember the first time Rick had to go to work and left me at home by myself. And I remember sitting in the rocking chair holding my son thinking, I hope he doesn't need anything beyond me feeding him or changing a diaper because I'm not sure I can do this. But I did. definitely with encouragement and support from Rick, and then also my mother and my mother-in-law. But just going to different moms groups and listening to stories from other moms and struggles that they were having that were either similar to the ones that I was having, or even having a much more difficult time. And then even, Rick and I, we had been married a couple months when we got pregnant with our son. So we celebrated our first anniversary with a 3-week-old. And we had a really good relationship. And I thought a really strong relationship. And for whatever reason, and it's kind of embarrassing to say this as a couples therapist, it didn't dawn on me how truly difficult it was going to be on our relationship, having this tiny newborn that needed so much from us. And so there, we had challenges and would argue and get irritated with each other. And, it just made, me feel isolated and lonely. And it was like, why is this even happening? And this is not something I was used to experiencing with Rick. So
that feeling of loneliness you're talking about.
Yeah.
And for you, Rick, what was that like for you?
The transition to parenthood?
Yes.
Very similar to what it was for Catherine in a lot of ways. I had a little bit more of experience with babies and toddlers than she had, so it didn't petrify me to be alone with them, but it was the first time I'd ever been responsible for a baby day in, day out. And that, you think you know what's going to happen, but until you're in the trenches with it, it's really eye-opening. And so I think that we both went through periods of being frustrated with each other and not really understanding why. And I just remember thinking we got about, our son was about a year old, that I wish somebody had sat us down and really told us what it was going to be like, and not the platitudes that everyone is told about how it's going to be the happiest time of their life. Because it certainly can be that, but it has a lot of challenges. And I think what we've tried to do is be as honest as possible about addressing those challenges so that people don't have the same trials that we went through.
Mm-hmm. It really is the expectations that gets in the way. And I think it starts really, obviously, the media does a bunch of stuff with that. But even if you start thinking about, when someone is pregnant and people walk up to them and say, oh, you look like you're glowing. This is like so good. You look better than I've ever seen you, and you look happier than I've ever seen you. So I think that sort of carries with you a bit to where when you have this new life then, and maybe you have some other types of feelings that come up, how you sort of begin to process that within yourself.
Right.
I agree with that.
Shouldn't I be happier?
Yes.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is that not only do you have these feelings, but there's guilt for having those feelings.
Right. Well, and I think now too, especially with social media and stuff, you see people posting these pictures, and a lot of it's always about how happy they are, and these perfect, pregnancy pictures and these perfect newborn pictures and stuff like that. And what you don't know what is really happening sometimes behind those pictures and the struggles. But a mom will see, like, I've talked to several moms, and they'll see that and they're like, I don't feel that. Like, I can't even get it together to get pictures taken, or, so I'm a bad mom because I'm not doing the every month taking a picture, and I don't have my baby book finished, and, all those comparisons that they go through, and just feeling, inadequate as well.
Right. You just feel like I'll be lucky if I can get out of bed, let alone to look like and put myself together to have a picture taken. What was interesting is I have a daughter who, and I think I mentioned my daughter's birthday is today, but I have her sister who is now 21, was born with tremendous amount of medical problems. And we learned about it prenatally. And one of the things that we learned through this process is how unusual it is to have a baby that's born healthy, and that the statistics actually work against you. To have a normal child with no problems and just a smooth delivery. And that sort of leads to me with what you're saying, is this whole concept of here I am and I have this struggle, And I think that it's a problem when for most people, I think it's more the norm, isn't it?
Yes. I think that's certainly been our experience talking to couples that are postpartum. And, when you have honest conversations with family members, you get to that point where, it's hard for everyone. And so what we try to do not only is to make people aware of what's going to be coming, but that the things that they're going to go through are very common, very universal, and they're not by themselves or even unique in having these feelings and these issues.
Right. And one of the things that I specialize in is a couples counseling that's related to attachments. And I know, Catherine, you too is very much involved with that whole concept of it's really the attachments that you want to focus on as a couple. Right. And when you have this other life here and the last thing you feel is close to your partner because of so many things, the impact of that is just so tremendous, because you mentioned that whole feeling of feeling lonely. Right. I wonder a little bit how the two of you dealt with that feeling of being alone.
Honestly, I tell this story on my website as well, but there was a specific time, and I worked on Saturdays for a while so that we had managed my schedule being in private practice in a way that we optimize our time at home with our son. So I worked Saturdays for a while, and on my way to work one day, Rick and I had gotten into I'm sure some kind of disagreement or whatever. And I left the house crying, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go help other couples. And I crying on my way to work because I'm not connecting even with my own husband. Like, how am I supposed to help other people? And I called one of my girlfriends who's also a therapist, and her kids are older, a little bit older than mine, which I'm like, thank goodness. So I had her wisdom, but she said, well, when was the last time you guys were on a date? And I was like, we haven't been on a date. We have a new baby. Like, what are you talking about? And so I went home that evening, and it was just better talking to her, like her validating how I was feeling was normal, just, put me in a much better space. And I went home, and my mother was visiting at that time. So she watched our son for us, and we just went out and I think had a drink or went out for dessert or something and just sat and talked, and just having that time together, just really, I found it was really important for us. And I joke about this, but I always gauge that I know we need to spend more time together on how like little things about him irritate me. Like if he doesn't wipe down the sink after shaving or something, like if that irritates me, then I'm like, oh shoot, we need to up our game here and go out for a date or something, because it's like, because usually that kind of stuff doesn't bother me.
So he needs to come up with lots of triggers that bother you then, so the two of you can go on lots of dates, it sounds like.
Right, exactly. But you know what I mean? Like, I think when we're not connecting as a couple, like the little things bother us. It's almost, I'll talk to couples and it's like, oh, well, they do this to me. And it's like, well, they're not doing it to you. There's not like they're trying to drive you crazy. But I think it's like when you're not spending that time together, it feels like that. It feels like there's every little thing kind of brings you apart, kind of divides you more and more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But what's interesting, and I think as a man, and I guess I want to hear your opinion on this, Rick, is sort of like who gets to decide that? And I think that's what gets to become such a huge issue for couples. Is what I heard is that, Catherine sort of talked to her friend and then came home and said, maybe we should go out on dates. But I would guess that for you, you wanted to do that also. And so how, as a couple, do you sort of negotiate whose feelings about it? How do you get to do it as a couple and have both people feel that they're equally important?
Well, I think that, Catherine does tell that story. And while I don't remember the specific day, I do remember feeling like we were not connecting. And after that time, when we've had that feeling, that she's had it or I've had it, it's really either one of us can say, hey, we need to have a date night or go out to lunch or some time where we are able to sit down and talk without the kids, without family, without work, where which we can just reconnect. And so to your question, I think either one of us can ask for it. And we both honor it when the other partner asks and says, hey, we need to make time for this.
Right. And I guess my point, though, isn't so much with the two of you, because I think that the two of you are sort of fortunate that you have this really connected relationship where you could be vulnerable with one another. What I find more struggling is to have two people who may be thinking some of these types of things, but think that if they bring it up, their partner's going to look at them like, are you crazy? What do you mean we're going to go out? What about, our child here? And it becomes this really pulling away from one another, as opposed to what it sounds like you do such a good job with, is you pull toward each other.
Well, what we try to do in our course is we try to talk about how this is a team effort. The baby is going to be happiest when the team, i.e. mom and dad, or mom and mom, dad and dad, are working together to have a safe, healthy, happy home. And what we also try to tell our couples that come to our course is that if you are not happy as a couple, you are not being the best parents you can be. So really, if you view it as working as a team for the betterment, for the health of your child, then it's not about being vulnerable. It's about strengthening the team.
Right. So it's really and I'm going to sort of call this, we were talking before we started recording that some of what you guys look at is the whole postpartum piece. And I like to think of it as a couple, you have postpartum depression. The relationship has postpartum depression, and I think everyone has it. Yeah. So it's how do you acknowledge that you already have this thing, and then how do you change it into a different experience?
Yeah.
I love that sigh, because it does feel so heavy sometimes.
Yeah, it does. And, I've talked to moms and I've talked to dads who feel like, hey, I'm experiencing this and, my partner doesn't seem to get it, or they won't acknowledge it, or, and I think that's always the hardest part, is when your other partner, you feel like they're not seeing things the same way that you are, and on some level makes you feel like crazy or like you're the one with the issue. So, I think it's important to state what you need in your relationship. When we talk about in our workshop, and I talk about this with couples in my practice, is about developing this postpartum plan. And, there's 3 key elements to that, I think. And, number one is like, how are you going to make sure that you're connecting with your partner on a regular basis? Like, what are the things that you're going to do either daily, weekly, monthly to make sure that you're connecting? And then what are the things that you're going to do to support your partner also in making time for themselves as well? And, and what does that again look like daily, weekly, monthly? And then of course there's that time, like, how are you going to bond with your child? And we always say, this is the postpartum plan, but these are, I think those 3 things are important at whatever stage your child is at. When they're a year old and when they're, school age and teenagers, it's like, I feel like those kind of 3 things are what you need to do to look at your relationship to, make sure that it's strong and healthy throughout being a parent or in a marriage, really, relationship.
I love what you just said, because it's simple, but yet it's not simple to do.
Right.
And it's clear. And I think that's what I sort of really appreciate about the two of you, is that in this course that you do and in your practice that you help couples, it's sort of taking a look at what are the unrealistic expectations that people come in with, and then how do you turn those into something that's actually doable? Right. And that's what those 3 things are, because you're right. If you connect on a regular basis as a couple, you're going to feel closer and more like a team. Yeah. If you're nurturing yourself, you're going to feel better. And then if you're bonding and having the attachments in your life, right, it just makes everything easier to contend with, doesn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And Rick, from your perspective, and some of the sort of, and I think one of the big, as we've been talking about, one of the biggest problems are those unrealistic expectations, and that people don't talk about that. What do you think from a male perspective, or from a man's point of view? What do you feel like some of the unrealistic expectations that you went into this with, or we all go into this, that you've learned really is not something that is reality?
Certainly felt this myself, and I heard it expressed from dads that are been in our course. The idea that, I can do it all. I can go to work, I can come home, and I can stay up all night if necessary, and I can spot my wife whenever she needs help, and I will do it, and I will not be upset about doing it, and I will do it with a smile. We try to talk a lot about that, about being realistic about our abilities and our need to work together. One of the things that we talk about is we have a scenario that we throw out to the group. It's 3 a.m., the baby's crying. We try to, let's take breastfeeding out of the equation. It's 3 a.m. Somebody needs to go get that baby. You, Dad, have heard the baby crying. And you're pretty sure Mom has too. What are you going to do? And we use that as a jumping off point. Invariably, the dad will always say, well, I'll get up. I'll get up. But then we throw on a next step. Well, let's just say you feel like you got the baby the last time the baby cried at 3 a.m. What are you going to do then? And the point really isn't so much what are you going to do, but to think about how you're going to address that both now, before the baby comes, talking about having a plan for what we're going to do at night, but also to try to get people thinking about, I'm not going to keep score. I'm not going to be keeping a score about how much I've done compared to my partner. We're going to work through that before we even get to that scorekeeping stage. So for me, it was learning how to communicate when I felt like I've taken more of my share,
right?
Which it was. Who knows how based in reality it was, but that was the feeling that I had, and learning how to express that to Catherine and vice versa, I think was very important for us.
So you're really talking about sort of setting your own personal limits with yourself and being able to share those with your partner.
Yes, absolutely.
I love sort of the scenario you gave, but I would have added one more. And you have a 7 a.m. meeting in the morning.
Right. There you go.
So then what? Or we could even twist it even further and go, you have a 7 a.m. meeting in the morning, and your wife has done it every time over the last week.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now what do you do?
Yeah.
So that there isn't a struggle between the two of you, and what it really goes to is you better talk about this before you get there.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Not at 3 a.m.
It never goes well at 3 a.m.
Right. And then I think the classic one for me as a man, it's always about feeling less important. Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with that feeling of you watch, the comfort that eventually, hopefully, happens with the mom and the child in terms of child care and all those things, and the child universally asks for mom, mm-hmm. and you want him to ask for you.
Yeah.
And what that feels like, and how do you deal with that feeling, and then do you then get resentful of your partner because they have the good time with the baby, mm-hmm. and you get the crying one.
Right. We do try to talk about that, and I think one of the ways that you work through that is the dad has to jump in there. It can't always be mom comforting a crying baby. Dad has to have time where that crying baby is going to have to rely on dad as well. And you're right, babies are going to cry for mom, but they're not going to be so upset if dad shows up, if dad has shown up before. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's important for the dads to hear, but I also think that's important for the moms to hear, that they have to allow their partner that opportunity to fail, to not have an absolute success the first time they go in there, but to work it out and try to establish that rapport and that ability to handle the baby.
You know, and I talk to moms a lot about this because it's usually probably 99% of the time in my experience with moms where they feel like the baby cries and dad's trying to soothe the baby and they feel like they have to like jump in because the baby's crying longer than they're comfortable with. And so, you know, I talk to them about, you know, it's a learning curve for all of us. Like, yeah, we might be able to do it faster because, you know, we can feed the baby, you know, especially if you're breastfeeding. And we're mom and the baby's been with us for 9+ months already. So it's easier for us to soothe the baby and we might be able to do it faster. But if you always jump in and take over for dad, you know, that can take a toll on him as well and feeling like I'm not even competent to do it. So then he's not going to want to step in. And I've had moms thank me later and say, thank you so much for pointing that out to me because I'm the type that wants to control and do everything. And I'm able to recognize that I need to let my partner figure it out as well.
And I think it's not always a control issue. I think some of it is wanting to be helpful and also, and I see this, I think more than the other, which is wanting to not have this child who you care so much about be unhappy.
Right.
And see the pain and the anguish and the tears and all of that. So, and getting caught up in that. And I think that's where the other thing that I see a lot of that is just so dangerous is moms and dads that then begin to have the child sleeping with them. And then what the impact of that on the intimacy. And I think that's, we're really beginning to maybe need to talk a little bit about that and with some of the things you're saying about how do you deal with a very young baby and keep your sex life alive.
This is usually where I turn the course over to Catherine.
So you just quietly are upset.
Yeah, he quietly steps back.
Yeah, I hide behind the poster board we have out there. And then she talks about intimacy, and that way I can't see her get red when she has to.
Oh, okay.
Actually, she does a great job with it, and what she's going to do right now. Take it away.
Well, I mean, I think I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier is, you know, making time, you know, for Rick and I, making that time to connect on a regular basis and making time for dates and scheduling it in. And I think before having a baby, you kind of take for granted having, you know, being able to go out and, you know, have sex, you know, whenever you want or whatever. But I think after baby, you kind of have to put it on the schedule. You know, you have to like, this is like a priority. Otherwise it's not going to happen. Like we need to, you know, put on there, you know, times that we're going to, you know, meet for lunch or go out to dinner. And I'll have a recent thing I've been telling couples that I work with because the excuse is always like, oh, I couldn't get a sitter, so we didn't go. So now my thing is like, have a regular, ideally weekly babysitter time, you know, whether it's in the afternoon one day or if it is in the evening, whatever works for your schedule, but have it set every week. This is our time. So then your decision is, what are we going to do? And not, we can't find a sitter, you know? So I think it's making sex a priority. And yeah, sometimes we're going to need to sleep, and probably in those early days, it does not happen. But I think it's having that intimacy and spending time together and closeness and feeling connected, whether you're just, you know, holding hands on the couch, watching a movie, or you're playing a game together and laughing, or you go for a walk, you know, around the neighborhood, whatever it is. But it's like making sure that you spend time together and that it's a priority.
See, and what I hear quite often is it's not so much about whether or not you're having sex, it's whether or not you want to have sex. And that the arguments that I see with couples is less about, you know, we do everything we can do to try to get there, but it doesn't happen because the kids or whatever. But I miss that, and letting each other know that you missed that
right.
is the bigger issue than just the act of doing it. And what I noticed happened with you and Rick here when we brought up the topic is just the sense of humor that the two of you have with one another is so wonderful because it's clearly a partnership. Mm-hmm. And that's the piece that I think people begin to lose sight of, which is why when the discussion about scheduling sex is not about scheduling sex, it's about scheduling time to have sex.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I think that this whole thing that we're talking about it's all holistic, right? When we go back to talking about the idea of a team, mm-hmm. if you feel like you're in a partnership or a team with your spouse, it's just going to make the intimacy that much more possible to happen, much more likely, versus one or both partners are feeling estranged from each other because they don't know what their role is or aren't comfortable with what their role is in this new environment that they found themselves in.
You know, we're getting close to winding down time-wise, mm-hmm. and one of the things I want to make sure we get to is this class that you guys offer and sort of how you two sort of came about doing this as a couple as opposed to most people are doing this one or the other doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting how I even came about. So going to these different moms groups and our own experience, you know, I started compiling a list of like, these are all the things I wish I would have known. And at the time I was attending a postpartum sculpt class, and I would take my son with me, and the woman that ran the program was opening up her own business. And so she was going to be offering other classes like childbirth classes and this and that. And she asked me, we were talking one day and she's like, so what is it you do? And I said, oh, I'm a marriage and family therapist. And she's like, oh, you want to teach a class for me? And I'm like, yes, I have the perfect idea for a class, you know? So her and I sat down and she's a childbirth educator, and we, you know, laid out an outline and did this curriculum for this class. And the very first time her and I taught it together. And as I was preparing and practicing for it, I had asked Rick to help me, and he's a really good teacher and he really knows how to tie things together. So as he was helping me, I was like, I would say something and he would say it back to me or whatever. And I was like, oh, I really wish you could teach this with me. And he's like, yeah, that would be kind of cool. Or I don't know what you said, but something like, yeah, I would do that. Like, that sounds cool. You know, so after her and I taught the class, she said to me, hey, let's do this again, but, you know, I can't teach it. Why don't you teach it by yourself? And I just said, what if I taught it with my husband? And she was definitely on board for that. And that's how it started. Like,
and what's so great about that is because so many men go into these classes thinking they're the bad guys, and mm-hmm. to see a man up there as well mm-hmm. just makes everything okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think Rick offers, you know, just a realistic, you know, dad perspective, what it's like to be a full-time working father with, you know, with children and how you balance those things. So, you know, I think he really offers a good realistic view. And and honestly, like, I'll run into either couples or one of the couples after a class, you know, now and again, and they'll be like, oh yeah, when we were in your class, I remember when you said this and that, and I'll be like, that's what Rick said, you know, like, you remember what he said, you know, so you know, I think then they value having both perspectives. So,
and I think what it also does is it shows with the two of you, because I'm sure, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, Rick, but I think I'm pretty sure what I'm about to say is accurate. You two don't always agree with each other. And how do you deal with that difference is important for people to see.
Well, Stuart, you're not right.
Oh, I know. Okay, I'm sorry. I sometimes miss it.
we don't always agree with each other, and
at least publicly. Right?
Well, it's actually
happened in our class sometimes, Saul.
Right. Yeah, we've done this class now quite a few times, and I think we have it down pretty well. But there in the beginning, I remember Catherine, I was saying something. I have no idea what I was saying. But Catherine actually said, what are you saying? And we glossed over that. And then later we had to have a talk. We can't do that to each other. You can't undercut what I'm saying, and I can't undercut what you're saying. And
right.
we have to work those problems out before we get in there.
Which is kind of true in dealing with children.
Which is the exact same thing that you have to have some kind of plan for how you're going to handle things before you hit the ground. And that's really what we try to convey, is that we're not going to get you through every single situation, but the more you're prepared for and the more you have created a pathway to deal with it, the better you're going to be.
So if you have a plan on how to stay close, how to make the parenting more realistic, or your expectation of the developmental issues even more realistic, that plan can take you anywhere you want it to take you, and it will keep you close and connected, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And the very first thing that we do when we start off in the class is we have the couple separately write down their 4 or 5 major concerns about
transition.
The transition. And we do that for a variety of reasons. One of it so that they can see that they have a lot of commonality. They're not unique. But the other reason we do it is so that they have a jumping off point once they leave our course to talk about, hey, how are we going to address these issues? What are we going to do together to make them not so scary? Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the best way that we could articulate what the class is about, is to try to make this course or make this transition period something that you get through as a couple together, as a stronger couple, but also with a happy, healthy baby at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's no perfect way.
No,
there's your way.
There's your way.
Yeah, there's your way. That
right, and how do you make it unique for you? I mean, one of the things that I do, and of course that I do with couples, is I have them, when things get their cycles that they get, I ask them to name the cycle. Mm-hmm. I think you need to have sort of like a name for the two of you, because, we all know and understand sport teams and things like that. So we're you're the higher team, and together we're going to do it the higher way, or, that kind of thing. Yeah. It just becomes something, and it doesn't have to be so serious all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
The two of you really do quite a service for the community in all the things you're doing, because what you're really talking about is not just I'm forgetting how long your class is. Is it a weekend or is it a 2 hour?
It's a 2 hour, course.
It's how long is the course?
It's 2 hours.
Okay. You're really talking about not just taking the 2 hours and saying, we're going to deal with everything there, but it's really going to be a work in progress to help couples know that this is lifelong.
Right.
This is not just now, but in the future too. And that what's important is how you feel about each other and keeping close.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, as I said, we're pretty much out of time, but I usually like to end the podcast with sort of a particular kind of question, and I'd like both of you to answer it. Through your work together, not so much as a couple in a relationship, but through the things that have sort of transitioned with you doing the class, what surprised you about yourself in the things that you learned and found out just by doing the class?
I'm going to let you take that one first.
Wow, that's a good question, Stuart. Wow.
The things that surprised you.
Well, I guess in some ways anyone that knew me back when I was younger would never suspect that I would do any sort of public speaking. I was one to quickly cry at the thought of standing up in front of a bunch of people. So I think if anything, I've learned that not only can I do this, but I love it. I really get excited every time we have a workshop coming up, because I love the couples. I always learn something new, and it just kind of keeps me energized for doing the work that I do and want to keep doing it. And so I think that's the most exciting part about, kind of even going back to your question about how I got into this. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a therapist of some sort, but honestly, I didn't know what kind. And now I'm this is totally, this is what I love doing. I love going to work. I love seeing the couples and stuff like that. And so I guess being able to get up and speak and share the things that we know and, hopefully help other couples not go through some of the challenges that we did. So
your passion is what really you're talking about, isn't it? That you're so, because you are, I could tell, you're just so passionate about this.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I could go on and on.
How about you, Rick?
Well, I guess the thing that's been surprising to me is when I first started this, I had some trepidation. I'm not a trained therapist, although I do represent therapists, so I know the lingo, but I had a little bit of nervousness about standing up there in this context. But I guess what's been surprising to me is that it's been great working with Catherine and get with their couples and just giving our experience and what that's taught us and helping them hopefully avoid those same pitfalls that we went through.
And you're very eloquent, and I think that probably, partly due to being an attorney, but I think what it sounds like you do such a good job with, Rick, is really being able to talk the language or the lingo and helping people feel normal, especially dads. I think us dads really need to feel normal, and we don't most of the time.
Yes, I agree with that, Stuart.
So I just want to thank you both again for coming on the podcast and sharing with everybody. But the last thing before we stop is I want you to tell everyone about your classes coming up. You have one, don't you?
Yeah, our next workshop is in April, so we're excited about that. And actually,
how can people register?
On my website, if you go to happywithbaby.com, there's a tab that says classes and events, and there's a calendar, and you can scroll till April 15th, and the next one's April 15th. But the exciting thing, too, is that we're getting ready to launch a retreat. So basically taking a lot of the concepts from our course and expanding them a bit due to feedback from other parents wanting more of it. Right. And so making it into a weekend retreat and calling it like a baby moon retreat. There's a lot of couples that go away before the baby comes, and so kind of want to incorporate a place that is relaxing and beautiful, and then also being able to really work and focus on their relationship and be able to have this postpartum plan for after baby comes. So.
And one of the things I'm going to do just to remind everyone is I'm going to put information both about the workshop as well as the course on the show notes. And the other thing, Catherine, that you're doing to my listeners, or for my listeners, not doing to them, but for them, is you're giving something to the listeners, aren't you? You have a video that you're going to be offering free, and there'll be information on how to get, and it's called Rockin' with Baby, if I remember right.
Yeah, in your relationship after baby comes home.
So if you click on the link in the show notes, Catherine is going to be sending you a video on how to keep your relationship close and connected while dealing with a small life in your home, and staying close in spite of that. So thank you again, guys, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks so much, Stuart.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with your host, Stuart Fensterheim. You're one step closer to reigniting that fiery passion with your partner. For more information and your 30-minute free phone consultation with Stuart, visit www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. We'll see you next time.